Let's begin. We are on Daf Nunvav Amud Aleph 56a. And we concluded the Gemara about what is the final halacha regarding the Kiddush on the first night and the second night of Sukkot. Of course, the Gemara is really talking about the first night of Sukkot, but we mentioned that there seems to be some type of a discussion about the second night of Sukkot. And the way the Gemara ended off, this is the Gemara right before the Mishnah, a little before the Mishnah. There's a small little, two small pieces afterwards, but basically the few lines before the Mishnah, the Gemara ends off with what is the final halacha. So the Gemara thought where did it start? Where did this whole discussion start? It started with Rav and Rabba bar Chana. That's where it started, where we had two Amayroim arguing about what the order should be, Shechiyanu or Leishe Basukkah, which one comes first, which one do we go by Tadir, which one is more often, which one is more Chiyuva D'Yoyma, the Chiyuv of the day. And the conclusion, the Gemara wanted to prove Rav wrong based on our Mishnah. And the Gemara said it's not a proof based on our Mishnah. We can't prove Rav wrong from the Mishnah because there's a brisa that brings an opinion of Abba Shaul that fits with Rav. So basically, the Mishnah's mention of the law of the Shtei HaLechem in the Lechem Apanim, that's the case the Mishnah is talking about. The idea behind it seems to imply something about our case, seems to give some type of a ruling, a verdict, what you could deduce from it to the case of the law of Sukkah of Kiddush on the first night of Sukkot. And the Gemara says it's not a proof because we have two opinions about the case of the Lechem Apanim, the showbread, the two breads of Shavuos and the showbreads. We have two opinions there. So it comes out that it's not necessarily so. You can't push off Rav's opinion because we have our Mishnah, because there's also another opinion of the Tanoim, and it comes out that Rav's opinion is acceptable as well. Now, what does the Gemara conclude? So Rav was of the opinion that you first say the not the common thing, Shechiyanu, you first say the Leishev Basukkah, and then you say the Shechiyanu. First, that was Rav's opinion. And what is and Rabba bar Chana said the opposite, Shechiyanu first, and then Leishev Basukkah. Now, the Gemara concludes, and it says that Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda, Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda says, we don't follow Rav, that Sukkah and afterwards Shechiyanu, Leishev Basukkah first. Don't follow Rav. Rather, you do Shechiyanu and then Sukkah afterwards. Rabba bar Chana. That's what Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda says. We got to go by Rabba bar Chana's opinion. Rav Sheshes Bered Rav Idi says Sukkah and afterwards Man, which is Rav's opinion. So we got two opinions of the later rabbis as to who should we follow. So the Gemara wants to know, like, what's the halacha? The Gemara brings these two later rabbis. We end up with the same argument. One says you got to follow that rabbi. The other one says you got to follow the other rabbi. We're stuck again with the same debate. So the Gemara concludes and says v'hilchasa. And what is actually the halacha? The halacha the Gemara says is Sukkah b'yachar kachzman. Sukkah, you first do Leishe Basukkah, and afterwards you do Shechiyanu. Basically, like Rab said. Now, this is very interesting. We're going to follow Rav. Rav doesn't follow the rule of Tadir v'she'ena Tadir. He follows the rule of the The Rav follows this rule of chiyuva deyoyma adif. The obligation of the day is more important. Chiyuva deyoyma. Okay, that's interesting that we're going to follow Rav here, especially because we have Tosfos's question. Tosfos is bothered with this. How we're going to follow Rav. We're going to do Sukkah v'yachakach Zman. We're going to do first the new thing, and then we're going to do the Tadir thing. We're going to first do the unique mitzvah, and only afterwards do the regular mitzvah. Normally we do the regular thing first. And Tosfos is bothered because we have a Mishnah. Our Mishnah seems to fit with Rabbi Bar Bar Chana's way. Yes, we answered Rav that we can't prove you wrong from the Mishnah because we have another opinion of the Tanoim that seems to fit with you. So we're not going to say tiyufta. We're going to say we've pushed you off and proved you wrong. We can't do that because we have an opinion of Abba Shaul which fits with your opinion. But we do have what's called the Stam Mishnah. And the Stam Mishnah seems very clear. We always paskin like the Stam Mishnah. Almost always we follow a Stam Mishnah. And the Stam Mishnah says, what do you do when you have a question of Shtei Halechem, the regular showbreads that are done on a weekly basis, and you have at the same day, you have the Shtei Halechem, the unique mitzvah of Shavuos. It falls on Shabbos. You'll have that two mitzvahs in front of you, a unique mitzvah special for this day. Once a year, you have this where it's the chametz breads that are considered a sacrifice, and you also have the regular showbreads that are done on a weekly basis. And what does the Mishnah say? What's the order when you have those two mitzvahs in front of you? What is the order that they're done? You know what the order is? First do the showbreads, the regular thing. The Mishnah says, Halach matzah, do the matzah thing first. And then Halach chametz, then do the Shtei Halechem. So the Mishnah is a Stam Mishnah. There's no opinion there mentioned. It's called a Stam Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't have any names. So it's basically, that's the final verdict. And the Mishnah is a Stam Mishnah. Why is our Gemara saying Hilchasa? We're going to go according to like Rav, which goes like Abba Shaul, and would say maybe the opposite of chametz first and then matzah. Our Mishnah is called the Stam Mishnah, so the halacha should really fit with the Stam Mishnah. So this is Tosfos's question. And Tosfos gives two answers. One is that we aren't worried about the Stam Mishnah. Of course, that itself deserves a lot of interpretation. What does that mean? We're not worried about a Stam Mishnah. Does it mean because the Stam Mishnah is talking about a different, we're comparing our law to the Stam Mishnah. But the Stam Mishnah is not specifically connected to our law. It's similar, a similar case. So maybe that's what Tosfos means, that we're not worried about a Stam Mishnah, that the Mishnah says when it comes to the Shtei Halechem and the Lechem Apanim, the Mishnah seems to make it clear what the order is. But that's not clearly spelled out what the halacha would be with Kiddush Sukkot night. So maybe that's what Tosfos means, that we're not worried about the Stam Mishnah because it doesn't clearly spell out the halacha in our case. It only spells out the halacha in the case of the Lechem Apanim and the Shtei Halechem, the showbreads and the extra breads. That's the first point of Tosfos. And then Tosfos says, Inami, and Tosfos comes up with an interesting understanding. He says, you know what? The Lechem Hapanim, the showbreads, they also could be considered that they are called Chayvas Hayoim. They're called the obligation of the day. In what that, again, Tosfos is a little cryptic. It's a little hard to understand. What does that mean? That it's called the obligation of the day. You have to understand the breads. They're really put on the table. They're put on the table the previous Shabbos. So it seems like the avodah of the breads was really done a while back, and now that we're distributing the breads on this day, that seemingly is a mitzvah that's not really so connected to today. It's really a mitzvah that was connected to the previous for a week ago, and the mitzvah of the Shtei Halechem is a Chayvas Hayoim, and that's what the understanding of that's the understanding that's a Chayvas. That would be the simple understanding. The initial understanding of the Gemara was that way, and that it would prove Rav wrong, because there's the Chayvas Hayoim here, and you have the obligation of this day, and we don't seem to care so much about the Chayvas Hayoim, because the Mishnah says you do the showbreads first. And the showbreads, we don't see it as the Chayvas Hayoim, as an obligation of the day. We see the showbreads as something that was the Avodah a week ago, and we happen to be distributing it today. And the Gemara and the Tosfos is answering, no, the showbreads are really a Chayvas Hayoim. They're an obligation of today also, just like the Shtei Halechem, the two breads. And therefore, what is Tosfos getting at? He's trying to say that, you know why the Mishnah says you do the showbreads first? Not because Tadir v'she'inoi Tadir, because this is more usual and that's less often, and therefore you do the more usual thing first, in that we don't care about the Chayvas Hayoim, we don't care about the obligation of the day. No, we do care about the Chayvas Hayoim, just like Rav says, except that we see the Mishnah. Rav understands the Mishnah differently. Rav understands that the Mishnah is not talking about a case that's similar to our case. It's a very different type of case, because in the case of the Mishnah, both of them are Chayvas Hayoims. Both of them are obligations for the day. And if you look at the showbreads as if that's the mitzvah of the day, and the Shtei Halechem is the mitzvah of the day, then there's no reason to say that you should do the Shtei Halechem first, the breads of Shavuos first, because the showbreads are also considered the mitzvah of the day. And if the showbreads are a mitzvah of the day, that's Chayvas Hayoim, that deserves to come first. And therefore, the Stam Mishnah says that you do the showbreads first. But that doesn't mean that when it comes to Sukkot, that you're going to have to do Shechiyanu.
What do you want?
So that doesn't mean that you're going to do Shechiyanu first when it comes to Sukkot, because the Shechiyanu is not specifically you wouldn't call it the mitzvah of the day. The Sukkah would be the mitzvah of the day, Leishev Basukkah. And afterwards, you could do Shechiyanu. This is the Chayvas Hayoim. The Sukkah, what you would say, is the Chayvas Hayoim, and the Shechiyanu isn't. And so, therefore, Tosfos understands that although the Gemara brought it tried to use it as a proof against Rav, and the Gemara gave an answer, but really there's an alternative answer to that. And the alternative answer, the Gemara doesn't mention, but Tosfos says it, and that is that they're very different cases. In that Rav's law is not contradicted by our Mishnah. It's not contradicted because the Mishnah is also talking about two cases. It's talking about a case where both are Chayvas Hayoim. The Mishnah's case is not the same as our case. And Rav says you can't bring that as a proof against me. The Mishnah's case is where even the showbreads is considered a Chayvas Hayoim. Now, why is the showbreads called a Chayvas Hayoim? That's really the question. Really, the Avodah was done a week before. Yes, Jeffrey.
I would say because you have to eat it now.
So the commentaries say because this Shabbos is when they bring the bazichin, the spoons
Spices
of the frankincense were offered on the altar now. So the bread is connected to the bazichin. And if the bazichin, the frankincense, the spoons that held the frankincense, they are being offered on the altar now, this is called the Chayvas Hayoim also. And so you would say that the bread, even though it was made and placed on the table, and that was a big avodah a week ago, but now this avodah is also very important, very connected to the breads, and you'd call it a Chayvas Hayoim. And so what Tosfos basically is saying in the second answer is that the halacha could fit with Rav, and it's not contradicted by a Stam Mishnah. It's not contradicted by our Mishnah, and therefore this could be the halacha. The halacha is Sukkah v'yachar kach man, and I believe that's what all of Klal Yisrael does. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch that we do the Sukkah, we say Leishev Basukkah, and then we say Shechiyanu. Now,
What was the avodah with the bread on the second Shabbos? You had to take the
you
spoon
took it
of
off and distributed it.
frankincense, put
They
it
did,
on the mizbeach,
right.
and then you distributed the bread.
The bread, yeah, as far as I
It
understand.
wasn't had nothing to do with the bread, the frankincense.
Well, they took the frankincense from where it was by the
Right,
bread,
on the shulchan, and they
the
put it
shulchan,
on the
right?
mizbeach.
Then on the mizbeach and distributed the bread. So that would be a reason why the breads are called the chayvas hayoim. They're called the chayv. These lechem apanim are called chayvas hayoim. When that's different than the shechianu and sukkah question of which one to do first. So that's the conclusion of Taisvis, and that's a conclusion of the Gemara, I should say, is that the Hilchasa is that Sukkah v'yacher kach zman. That's the way the Gemara ends. Now, the Rush brings down earlier on, not over here, because but it's on an earlier Gemara. The Rush brings down that there seems to be two opinions here for the second night of Sukkot. The first night of Sukkot, we're going to do the Sukkah and afterwards Shechianu. Okay. That's what the Gemara seems to conclude. The problem is that on the second night of Shavuos, the second night of Sukkot, you already said a Shechianu bracha on the Sukkah. You said a Shechianu bracha on the Sukkah. So now you're going to say a Shechianu again, true, but you don't need the Shechianu for the Sukkah. The second night of Sukkot is a obligation to make Kiddush, and in that Kiddush you have to say Shechianu, and you also need to say a Leishev Basukah, but the Leishev Basukah bracha is not really connected to the Shechianu bracha. On the first night of Sukkot, it is, because the Shechianu bracha is going on the Kiddush, and the Shechianu bracha is also going on the Leishev Basukah. It's about the Sukkah, dwelling in the Sukkah, and therefore you're saying a Shechianu afterwards because it's connected to both. On the second night of Sukkot, the Kiddush, it's connected to the Kiddush, it's not connected to the Leishev Basukah. And therefore, because the Shechianu bracha is connected to the Kiddush on the second night, the question is it an interruption between the Kiddush and the Shechianu bracha if you do a Leishev Basukah first? Why? Because you already said a Shechianu on the Sukkah. What do you mean? I said a Shechianu. Yeah, the first night. But the first night might not have been Yantiv, because we're calling it a Sveika D'Yoma. So the first night wasn't Yantiv. So then maybe I do need to say Sukkah, and afterwards, first I have to do Sukkah, and then I should do Shechianu. And the Shechianu bracha is going on both the Sukkah and the Kiddush, the holiday. Maybe that makes sense, the second night. No, says the Rosh. Because you're allowed to say the bracha Shechianu on the Sukkah even before Sukkot comes in. When you build the Sukkah, you could say it. So it doesn't, the bracha on the Sukkah, the bracha Shechianu on the Sukkah, that bracha really has nothing to do, it's not necessarily connected specifically to the first night of Yom Tov. That could be recited earlier on. That bracha Shechianu that's connected to the Sukkah, that really is something that's not specifically connected to Yom Tov. It's connected to the Sukkah, which is when you build it, you could say that bracha. And therefore, the Kiddush on the second night needs a Shechianu, but the Sukkah doesn't need a Shechianu because you said it the night before, even if it wasn't Yom Tov the night before, which is what we call the first night and the second night. We always consider it a questionable what day it is. So the second night is the Shechianu is solely on the Kiddush, connected to the Kiddush. So don't go and interrupt that Shechianu that's connected to the Kiddush with the Leishev Basukah in the middle. Make that Shechianu connected to Kiddush. Put it right next to the Kiddush, and only afterwards do the Leishev Basukah. And comes along the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tafresh Samach Aleph, chapter 661, as a small little paragraph here of the Shulchan Aruch, 661. Beleil Yom Tov Sheni, on the night of the second night of Yom Tov, Omer Kiddush, you say Kiddush, Uzman Acharov, and you say Shechianu Miyad, immediately after the Kiddush, at the end of the at the end of the paragraph of Kiddush, and the Acharkach Bercha Sukkah, and afterwards the bracha of Sukkah, and comes along the parentheses, Zu Das Harosh, this is the opinion of the Rosh, V'chein Ra'oi Linhoig, and so is it appropriate to be Noiheg, that we flip it for the second night. And comes along the Mishnah Berurah, Sukkah, that on the second night you say Shechianu first and afterwards Sukkah. Desman loikoi ela akiddush v'laya Sukkah, because the Shechianu bracha is connected to the Kiddush and it's not connected to the Sukkah. The Afim Yom Rishon Choil, even if the first night is considered a weekday, which is because we have a doubt if it's the first night or the second night, and that's why we celebrate 2 days outside of Israel. So even if you want to call the first night a weekday, even if that would have been the case where there was a mistake and the first night was the weekday night, Yotza Bisman, you were Yotza Bisman the Sukkah, with these man for the Sukkah. For the Shechianu bracha for the Sukkah, you were Yotze. Because it's no worse than saying the bracha when you built the Sukkah. The Yotze that you were Yotze, even though it's not the actual holiday now. Maybe the day before, the first day of Yom Tov was really the day before Yom Tov. And you were miscalculated the days, which is why we have celebrate 2 days. And even so, it would still be that you fulfilled the mitzvah with that bracha of Shechianu. Therefore, you're not allowed to be mafsik. You're not allowed to separate and interrupt your kiddush with the Shechianu bracha, with the bracha of Sukkah. You're not allowed to be mafsik with the bracha of Leisha Basukkah, ben Kiddush Lizman, which would be between the Kiddush and the Shechianu bracha. Don't put a Leisha Basukkah in the middle. On the first night, you can do that, because the Shechianu bracha is for the Sukkah as well. So on this the first night, it's fine. But on the second night, the Shechianu has to be close proximity to the Kiddush and not letting Leisha Basukkah interrupt. However, if you didn't eat the first night in the Sukkah, and also the next day you didn't eat in the Sukkah, then then you would say the bracha on the second night. Sukkah, you would say on the second night the same thing that we do on the first night, which would be Sukkah v'yachar katzman, first Sukkah, and afterwards Shechianu, da'az hazman yiya koyash name, because then the Shechianu bracha is for the Sukkah, because now you're finally eating in the Sukkah, and for the Shechianu for the Kiddush. So it's going to be for both. It's for the Sukkah and for the Kiddush. But in other words, if you didn't eat in the Sukkah the first night, so then your Shechianu bracha was not really for the Sukkah. It was really for the holiday, and if it's not considered a holiday the first night, then that Shechianu bracha has no validity, and really the second night Shechianu is valid for everything. It's going to be for the Sukkah and for the Kiddush, and so that would be an exception to this rule. Now, the Mishnah Berurah does bring down here, this is the appropriate thing to be noyeg. He brings that that there are opinions that argue with this, and it brings a Radvaz, Rad Marshal, Avi Hoezri, and that you always do Sukkah Nachar Kachzman. So I know the minhag in Lubavitch's to do is to flip it the second night, but it could be that there are other minhagim. I'm not so aware if anyone doesn't flip it. Jeffrey, yes.
So if somebody made a mistake, nobody has to make a big deal about it. Because it's very
Right.
hard because
Right.
people read the books,
Oh yeah.
right, and the books don't always have convenient explanations, so they or if you have a Shabbos Shiron, it doesn't have all the other details.
And when you're saying Kiddush, you're not looking at all the fine print because you're trying to say the Kiddush without wasting, making it look
Exactly.
like you're starting to learn now.
Exactly. So I
Yeah.
see that happen, but it's no reason to correct the person and make everybody feel bad.
Good point. Yeah. But the Mishnah says whoever wants to be noyig this way, you don't stop them. Now, the other way, the other opinion has a source to what they say. And the other opinion, their source it's called Yak Nahaz. What do we see when we do what's called Yak Nahaz? Yak Nahaz is when you have to do Havdalah in the holiday Kiddush. Why? Because Shabbos fell right before the holiday. So let's say Sukkot falls on a Sunday, Saturday night and Sunday. So now you need to include in the Kiddush Yayin Kiddush Ner Havdalah and Zman, Yak Nehaz, Ner Havdalah. So you have to say extra brachas because you're including a Havdalah in your Kiddush. Now, when you include the Havdalah in the Kiddush, when do you do Shehechiyanu? After the Havdalah. You're doing the Shehechiyanu bracha after the Havdalah. And the Shehechiyanu bracha is not connected to the Havdalah. It's connected to the Kiddush. And yet you interrupt the Kiddush with the Havdalah. So we see that it's not a problem to interrupt. So the Rosh mentions this proof, and he brings it from the Ravya. The Ravya is the source of this opinion that argues. But the Rosh says, no, it's not a comparison. And the reason is, he says, because the Havdalah needs a kois. You need to recite Havdalah on a cup of wine. You said a Retiree Hagafen on the wine. You made Kiddush on the wine. Okay? Now you got to do Havdalah. Where do you do Havdalah? On the wine. You therefore need to do the Havdalah first before the Shehechiyanu bracha. Because we need the Havdalah immediately after the bracha of the wine, or at least after the Kiddush bracha, which is right after the bracha of the wine, without interrupting the Havdalah with Shehechiyanu. So here, if you think about it, on the one hand, you're interrupting the Shehechiyanu bracha with the Havdalah, but on the other hand, the Rosh says, that's not really so important because you're not really interrupting it because you need Havdalah to be here because otherwise you're going to interrupt the Havdalah from the bracha Retiree Hagafen. The Havdalah needs to be next to the Retiree Hagafen. So what do you want to do? You're saying we should do Shehechiyanu. Yak Nahaz should really be Yayin Kiddush Zman Ner Havdalah. You want to do Zman before? Then you're going to interrupt the Havdalah with the Shehechiyanu bracha. You can't do that because you said bracha on the wine and you got to say right away the Havdalah. So you can't put the Zman before. So that's why by Yak Nahaz, when Shabbos falls before Yontiv, you do Shehechiyanu at the end, the final, after the Havdalah. But here by Sukkah, you don't have that excuse. You don't need to the Shehechiyanu bracha or you should do the Shehechiyanu bracha first, and the Leishev Basukah, the Leishev Basukah you do afterwards. What's the wording here? Aval hacha isukah loy bo'izman balayla, balel sheni. Belel Sheni. Loy Boizman, Belel Sheni. Lama Yafsik Basukkah, Bein Kiddush Lazman. Why should you interrupt between the Kiddush and the Zman with a Leishe Basukkah? Why should you do that? Why should you interrupt? So the Rush argues with the Ravya. The Ravya brings a proof from Yaknahaz, and the Rush argues with it. And that seems to be a very common minhag, and that's what's brought in Shulchan Aruch. And although there are some that argue on it in the later commentaries, seem to there definitely is other opinions, but the minhag based on Shulchan Aruch is to follow the Rush, not the Ravya. Yes, Jeffrey.
So it's even more complicated because now we go to shul first and we daven Mariv, and in Mariv we've already said Havdalah. So you could easily argue, it's true the other people may not all have heard Havdalah yet, but you already said it.
No, we're specifically doing the Havdalah ala kois. We're not relying on Havdalah of the Mariv. When you do the Havdalah later, you're doing it specifically ala kois, so it needs to be near the bracha of the yayin. And that's
but clearly there was a time when it was not required to say the Shemona Esrei, and so this is really based on an earlier period.
No, it's based on the Rush. That was in the time of the Gemara. There was a discussion in the Gemara about it, but the rabbis ultimately obligated. The Gemara talks about this, something of the past, that there was a time before the rabbis established it, in the davening, they couldn't afford it and so on. And then the rabbi said, we have to do both. So the Gemara talks about it, but the Rush is way after. These opinions are talking about in today's day and age when we do both. That's where their argument is, not about in the time that the Gemara talks about before the rabbis had established it in Tefillah. We're not talking about then. We're talking about the final halacha. So, specifically the kiddush that we're doing is specifically to fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush ala kois. So that's why it has to be done in proximity to the bracha on the wine, and therefore you would say shachianu later, and then you could say that that's different than the sukkah in shachianu bracha. Leisha Basukkah, which one to do first? Here you would say that maybe the Shachianu bracha should come before the Leisha Basukkah because you want the Shachianu bracha near the Kiddush. So that's the bottom line based on the Shulchan Aruch's opinion.
And the other thing is that we do say the Kiddush for a lot of people who may not have davened. That's for certainly that's the case. But we make sure that we don't have that situation for Sukkot, because it's like Yom Kippur, and so we don't ever have Sukkot on a Saturday night.
Well, the second night maybe.
I don't think so. You could have the first night on Friday night, yes. So that's what you're saying. You could, for the second night, you would have Havdalah. Yeah, okay. The second night, but you can't have for the first.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, you get into the same problem. You get into this problem.
You can.
But we're not dealing. We're not really specifically talking about Sukkot. With any of the holidays, Yak Nahaz would be a proof to what to do on Sukkot regarding Shechianu and Leisha Basukkah. So we don't really care if Sukkot falls out on Yak Nahaz. We care about if any holiday has Yak Nahaz, seems to be a proof about Sukkot regarding Shechianu and Leisha Basukkah. It doesn't have to be Sukkot. Sukkot was just an example. But okay. All right. Anyway, let's continue. So now we are just going over. So that was the halacha part of the conclusion of the Gemara. And now I hope that all of you have a good understanding on Sukkot, why we flip the brachas and why it's a little confusing, why you might want to use a siddur on Sukkot night and maybe look at it again twice before you say the Kiddush. At least so you'll do it the correct way that we are told to do it. And now you have a deeper understanding where it comes from, what the issues are, and the sources. And now the next Gemara that we learned is a Gemara that says that there's really extra. The Mishnah mentions two types of sacrifices that are going to be brought on the holiday, that are specifically brought by the mishmar that is the weekly mishmar. Not every mishmar can participate in these, but specifically the weekly mishmar is the one that brings these. And the Mishnah gives a vague types of sacrifices. It says sha'ar karbanesh tzibor. That's the first little piece of Gemara. And then the next little piece of Gemara is makriv asakol. Both of them seem to be adding something about the weekly mishmar gets the benefit, gets the honor to bring these type of sacrifices. Shar karbanesh tzibor, the other communal sacrifices. What does that refer to? That's a very general statement. The other korbanos tzibor, and then also the next little piece was he in that group of kayanim that is meant for this week. They are makriv esakol. They bring everything. But that's also a very general statement. So what do these include? So the Gemara said that the first statement, shar korbanos tzibor, that they bring all the other communal sacrifices. That's referring to the korbanos, the sacrifices that are done when there is a mistake by Bezdin. And there's something called a par helam davar shel tzibor, the bull that is brought from a mistake in that Bezdin paskin, and it has to do with a sin that's subject to kares if it was done on purpose, and because it was done by mistake, it's subject to a korban chatos, a sin offering. But because it wasn't really you who made that mistake, it was Bezdin make that mistake. So we don't obligate you to bring a personal chatos, but rather it's called a korbanos tzibor. It's more of a communal sacrifice, and that would be because it's a Bezdin's mistake. So it's called a kashar korbanos tzibor, and that is a par helam davar shel tzibor, the bull that's brought by such a mistake that Bezdin permitted something that they shouldn't have, and they realized afterwards, and they bring they par helam davar shel tzibor, and that who is the ones? It's a sin offering. Who gets those portions? And who brings that sacrifice? The mishmar, the group of kayanim that are meant specifically for this week, even though it's brought on the holiday, and it's really for the whole community, but it's not for the holiday. It's really not disconnected to the holiday, and therefore it's specifically the mishmar, the group that is set, that is meant for that week. They're the ones who bring it. And then the other is a very similar case where Bezdin makes a mistake about idol worship. It's slightly different in the fact that they bring for that sin, they bring a seirei avodah zarah. It's the sin. It's a sin offering. That's a he goat, and that is it's also a chatos. And they bring a he goat for a chatos, and they also bring a par lo'ila, a bull for a burnt offering, and a he goat for a chatos, and the Gemara here is basically saying that the seirei avodah zarah is something that is brought specifically by that the weak group of kayanim. They're the ones who bring it. And then the Gemara says the other extra statement in the Mishnah, the statement where it says that mishmar, that group of kayanim, bring everything. What is everything? So it says that there's sometimes that the mizbeach is batel, is bored. When the mizbeach, the altar, is bored, so and no one's bringing sacrifices, so nothing being burnt on it, so they would bring from the money that they had collected, they would bring animals for oilos. It's called a burnt offering for a kayetz hamizbeach, and this was a kayetz hamizbeach, like it's a type of dessert that people eat at the end of the meal. So that was the this type of a sacrifice, and it's on the holiday. They're bringing this extra sacrifices, but it's not specifically connected to the holiday, and therefore only the mishmar, only the group of kohanim that it's their week, they're the ones who bring the kayetz hamizbeach sacrifices. They're the one who bring these sacrifices, not all the kohanim. So those are the two additional types of sacrifices that are brought specifically by the mishmar kavua, by the group of kohanim, that it's their week and only their week, and they're the ones who get to bring those and get partake of the portions. And then we had the next Mishnah. We just started it, but let's start it again. So we're going to start with the Masnisin, page 56a. 56a, Yom Tov Hasamach L'Shabbos, the beginning of the Mishnah, which must be about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. 56a, the bottom, 10 lines up from the bottom. Yom Tov Hasamach L'Shabbos. When Yom Tov falls right next to Shabbos, Bein Milfaneha, Bein Lacharel, whether it's right before Shabbos, or which would mean that the end of Yom Tov ends right before Shabbos, or Bein La'achareha. I think I mixed up the order. Let me start again. Yom Tov Hasamach L'Shabbos. When you have Yom Tov that's near Shabbos, Bein Milfana, whether it's before, and which means that Shabbos starts when Yom Tov ends, or Bein La'achareha, whether it's after Shabbos, that Yom Tov starts after Shabbos ends, like it's on a Sunday. And Hayu call the Mishmaros Shavos. So in these cases, all the Mishmaros were equal. Bechiluk lechem aponim, in dividing up the showbreads. And what this means is that this Shabbos, whether it's right after Yom Tov ends or it's right before Yom Tov begins, do you call the Shabbos a Shabbos of the holiday? Not really. It's not the Shabbos of the holiday. This is a Shabbos that's either before or after. Yes, it kisses the holiday. It's in close proximity to the holiday. There's no interruption between Shabbos and the holiday, but you wouldn't call it the Shabbos of the holiday. And there's much room to say that the weekly group of the Mishmar, they're the ones you would think should be the ones to bring the sacrifices on that Shabbos. And they are the ones who bring the sacrifices. But what about the lechem aponim? What about the showbread? The showbread was something that we said was a unique law that gets divided and gets distributed to the entire group of kohanim on Yom Tov. What about that when it falls, that's divided on a Shabbos? What about when that Shabbos is a Shabbos that's touching Yom Tov and there's no interruption, and all the kohanim are still there from Yom Tov, or they're there early for Yom Tov, and they have to be there Shabbos already because they can't travel on Shabbos. So they're there either for the Shabbos before Yom Tov, or they're still there from the Shabbos. They're still there because Yom Tov ended and Shabbos began, and they can't leave. So they're still there for the Shabbos after Yom Tov. So either way, all the families are there. Do they get a portion of the lechem aponim? So the Mishnah tells us that, believe it or not, this sounds surprising, but yes, they will get a portion of that lechem aponim, even though the Shabbos is not part of the holiday. Now, what about if there's a one-day separation? So a lot of people maybe will stay, they can't travel. There's one-day interruption between the Shabbos and the holiday. If there's one day that is separating in between the Shabbos and the Yom Tov, and so Yom Tov ends on a Thursday, or it starts on a Monday, and so you got Yom Tov right next to Shabbos, but it's not touching it. Then Mishmar Shezmanoi Kavua, the Mishmar that their time They are the mishmar that the mishmar that their week is meant to be that, those 2 weeks. They're the mishmar that's leaving and the mishmar that's arriving. They basically stop on Shabbos. So the mishmar that's leaving and the mishmar that's arriving, they're called the mishmar shezmanoi kavua. So what is the law? They are hayonoitel eser chalis. They take 10 of the 12 chalis. V'hamisakev noitel shtayim. In the mishmaros, all the other mishmaros that are still there because of the holiday, they get a little portion. They get two out of the 10. So the mishmar that's zmanoi kavua, they're the ones leaving and the ones entering. They divide up the 10 challahs, and the other mishmaros get 2. V'shar yemais hashana, but if it wasn't this holiday right next to or somewhat close to Shabbos, and it was just a regular Shabbos, the other Shabbosim, hanichnas noitel sheish, the new group that's entering to do the work, they get 6. And hayoytze noitel sheish, and the one that's leaving, the one that's finished this Shabbos, they take 6. They get 6. Rabbi Yehuda says hanichnas noitel sheva. Rabbi Yehuda argues. He says that on a regular Shabbos, forget about Yontif now. Let's just talk about a regular Shabbos. You don't divide it up 6 and 6. The one that's coming and the one that's leaving, each of them gets 6. No, Rabbi Yehuda says the nichnas, the one that's entering, the new group that's entering on this Shabbos, they are noitel sheva. They get 7. V'hayoytze noitel chomesh. The one that's leaving gets 5. So it's divided up by 7 and 5, not 6 and 6. Hanechnasin, the ones that are entering, the new group of Kayanim, that's their week. Cholkin b'tzafain, they divide the lechem aponim, the showbreads, in the northern part of the Beis Hamikdash, which is considered the more honorable place in the Beis Hamikdash, place where they would sacrifice the holy, special, extra holy sacrifices, kodshe kodshim. And so they would be divided. They would divide it there, and the hayotzim, the one that are leaving, they would divide it. They would divide it in the south, which is considered less honorable. The ones that are entering are considered, people entering are more honorable. They're preparing for the Avodah, and they're about to do a big mitzvah. And these people finished the mitzvah. So it's less of a obligation of honoring them. There is an understanding also here that the ones that are leaving, they shouldn't make a mistake and try to go and do avodah, do the service, and it's no longer for them to do the avodah. So therefore, we sort of bring them into the south in order that they should feel that they are leaving and finishing the avodah and shouldn't make a mistake and start oh, we got to carbon tavish abein arbaim. We got to bring the afternoon sacrifice now, and they'll sort of like lose themselves. So we make it, we sort of put them in the right environment that they should realize that they are the ones leaving and not make a mistake. There is a final understanding that when you enter the Beis Hamikdash, you're supposed to enter in the way that you're turning right. So when you turn right, those are the ones entering. They're going to be in the north because you enter on the east. So when you turn right, you're in the north. The ones that are leaving are also turning right. They're turning out. And because of that, they're going to be on the south on their way out. So they're going to, they keep turning. Well, they enter towards the right. And when they leave, I guess it would be called left. When they leave, they're considered left. The idea is that you enter to the right, and that would be why the people that are entering enter to the right. And then when you leave, you go towards the left. That would be the south side.
When they leave, do they back out, like you back out from the Rebbe's presence? Or no?
Yeah, so we mentioned that, but not the entire time. Just at when they get to the gate, they turn around, But it's the Yotzim derech Smoil. They go derech Smoil towards the left. Okay, so that's why they divide that. That's another reason given why they divide it. Now, the Mishnah continues and it says, Bilga, the Mishmar called Bilga, Lioilam chaylekes bedarim. It always divides their portion in the south. In other words, even when they enter, they don't get the honor of dividing in the north. Instead, they get pushed aside to the south, that they are sort of humiliated in a certain sense, that they have to go to the south to get to divide their portion. And it also mentions the tabato and its ring, kavua, is locked. They can't open it in order to use it for the sacrifice that they normally would use these rings for the sacrifices when they do the slaughtering. And the mishmar called Bilga also was sort of degraded. It was less. It was dishonored, and they sort of locked its ring that it was unusable, and so therefore it would always need to use someone else's ring. V'chaloina, in its window, which basically means a sort of like a cubby. Its cubby was where they would put all their knives. It was stuma. It was locked. So they needed to use other sort of cubbies or closets in order to someone else's closet to put their knives for their or they had to hold them. They weren't able to use their closet. Okay.
Rabbi,
Now,
question.
Yes, Ezra.
This Mishnah appears to be very familiar. Where else has it appeared?
Well, the reason why it's familiar is because this is a famous story of Miriam Bas Bilga, who you've probably heard, and you've probably also heard this Mishnah when you hear a siyum. You might have heard this Mishnah when you hear a siyum on Masechta Sukkah. So it's considered, it's a common Masechta people make a siyum on. So you might have heard that from there. But the Gemara is going to go into the story of Miriam Bas Bilga, and we'll see on the second, on the end, right, really at the end of the tractate. So it's on the next page, the story of Miriam Bas Bilga. And in order to say that story, you always review this point in the Mishnah. So I'm guessing that's where you might have heard it before, because it's a famous story. So the Mishnah basically says three things that the Bilga Mishmar, the Mishmar called Bilga, that family of that group of Kayanim, they sort of got punished. And because we'll see in the reason in the Gemara why they got punished, but the three things that they were punished with is that they don't get the showbreads in the north, they get it in the south. They are not able to use that ring that would hold the carbon when it's being shechted. They weren't able to utilize their ring. They had to use someone else's ring. and they were not able to use their closet because it was locked, and that would be where they normally would put their knives. Now the Gemara says, "My milfaneha u'may mila'achareha." What does it mean that Yom Tov would fall near Shabbos, before Shabbos or after Shabbos? What does that mean? So the Gemara says, "Ilema lefaneha." If it means that it's before Shabbos, which would mean that Yom Tov Rishon, the first day of Yom Tov, falls before Shabbos. In liachareha, if Yom Tov falls after Shabbos, means Yom Tov Acharon, the last day of Shabbos of the holiday, falls after Shabbos, then Hainu Shabbos Shabbos, that would be a Shabbos within the holiday. Of course, that Shabbos they're going to be everyone is going to get a portion of the lechem apanim, of the showbreads, because if it's the Shabbos that falls after the first day of the holiday, so it's very next to it's a Yom Tov that falls next to Shabbos, and Milafaneha before it, meaning the first day of Yom Tov, then comes Shabbos, the second day of the Sukkah is Shabbos. So what are you going to say? That maybe the showbread, they don't divide the showbread? That's the Shabbos that falls within the holiday. Of course they're going to get it. But what about if Shabbos falls on the day right before the last day of Yom Tov? So if Shabbos falls right before Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeret Simchas Torah in Eretz Yisrael, so that day, what are you going to say? That you don't divide the showbread to everyone? That's the Shabbos that's within the holiday. Of course, everyone gets a portion. That's what we said in the previous Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Ella, rather, you have to translate it a little differently. That Lefaneha means Yom Tov falls before Shabbos. It means Yom Tov Ha'acharon, the last day of Yom Tov falls before, not the first day of Yom Tov. It means the last day of Yom Tov falls before Shabbos, and then Shabbos falls on, Shabbos is right after it. That was on a Friday, and Shabbos comes right after Yom Tov is over. In Le'acharel means Yom Tov falls after Shabbos. What that means is Yom Tov Rishon means the first day of Yom Tov, not the last day of Yom Tov. The first day of Yom Tov falls on a Sunday, which is right after Shabbos. And the Gemara says, "My taima, what is the reason that everyone gets a portion? This is not the holiday. This is the day before, the day after the holiday." So the Gemara says, "Kivan dahani maktami," because these come early, and they can't leave. Vahani me'achari, and these leave late. And there's no other option. They're not able to go back. They can't come early. They can't not come early, because you can't come on Shabbos. You can't travel on Shabbos. They can't leave early because you can't leave on Shabbos. So Tiknu Rabbanon Milsa, the rabbis established this law. Since the Kohanim have to be there anyway, they established a law, Ki heichi denechlu bahadei hadodi, so that all the Kohanim could eat and receive the lechem aponim and get a portion of it. So the rabbis established this in order that everyone should have a portion of the showbreads. And so that is the explanation of the Mishnah. This was not a biblical thing. This is a rabbinic rule that they established. We are going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.